Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about something particularly creepy in disappearances. Now, don't get me wrong, other true crime cases such as homicides or kidnappings and stuff like that are equally horrifying, but there's always been something so disturbing about a disappearance, especially when the person has never been found, nor has their body. Creepy and odd disappearances are the root of so many crazy and even just basic theories that it really allows the mind to run wild and wonder what happened the day of the disappearance. So, in today's video, I'm going to be covering a few disappearances that I was able to find on the internet. And honestly, there are so many that I did just want to say this might end up becoming kind of a series. But as for right now, I'm going to cover that. And also, something else I wanted to say is I did avoid and just kind of leave off more well known ones like Amelia Earhart and the Colony of Roanoke, just because they are pretty well documented, and I feel like a lot of people have done videos and content on them, and I didn't really want to beat it to death. So today we're going to be looking at a little more niche, obviously not something you've never heard of. You've maybe heard of a few of these, but a little more niche than the more popular ones. And typical YouTuber schlock, before we get into the video, if you like this content or any other content on my channel, please consider liking or subscribing. It's not too much for you guys, especially if you like the content, and it goes a long way in helping me and the channel grow, so thank you guys very much. Also, while I was recording, like literally just now, I had to cut one of the bits here because I got a call from someone who I've never gotten a call from before, and they were just like silently listening to me like say, "Oh, hello, who's this?" for like 30 seconds. So the creepy atmosphere is already set for this video, and yeah. The first case we'll be covering is the disappearance of Joshua Guimond. Joshua was a highly intelligent and very sociable young man who was attending St. John's University in Minnesota. He had been so intelligent that in high school he was a straight-A student and was actually the valedictorian of his class. On November 9th of 2002, Joshua Guimond was working on a paper in his dormitory when a few of his friends came to pick up him and his roommate for a party that was being held on the other side of the campus. And even though the campus was split in two by Stump Lake, there was a bridge to just go across it. So the walk was only 5 minutes, and that's how long it took Joshua, the roommate, and his friends to get to the party. Like previously stated, it took them 5 minutes to get there, so they arrived around 11:10 or 11:11. They got to the party, and it was really just the basic kind of hangout / party where they were playing poker and drinking. And Josh didn't stay long. He only stayed there for 35 to 40 minutes before he departed. However, friends didn't find this too surprising, as they noticed he didn't bring any valuables like his wallet or his glasses, and apparently he had also hinted that he had other places to be that night. Friends also noted how even though he had had 7 beers, he didn't seem intoxicated or didn't even have a buzz, which, just quickly to interject, 2 things. Real friends don't count drinks. They don't do that. And 2, how can you have 7 beers and not be like buzzed or intoxicated? I'm not saying it's not realistic, but I have 1 twisted tea and I start singing my collection at Marvin's room just a little too passionately, so I don't know if I just don't believe that because of how much of a lightweight I am, or if I'm just jealous. Maybe it's a mix. Anyways, he arrived at the party at 11:10. He left the party at 11:45 and departed for his dorm, and his friends once again noted how he hadn't been wearing anything appropriate for the winter months. He only had jeans and a light sweater, so if he were to go for a long walk, it wouldn't at all be a good scenario for him. But since it was a short 5-minute walk, none of them worried too much. But when Joshua failed to show up to a mock trial for his law class the next day, people began to get worried, as he was a very dedicated student who wouldn't usually do that. Worried, a few friends from the class went to go check his dorm, and when they got there, they saw the roommate who had been at the party, and he actually said that Joshua had never returned that night, or at least when he was there, Joshua was not. It was quickly after this that they began a search on campus and quickly declared him missing. The initial search was just made up of security or campus security as well as friends that went to the university, but when they couldn't locate him or find him, they quickly contacted police, which they started a formal investigation and search for Joshua. When the investigation started, 2 people had claimed that they had seen Joshua the night of the disappearance. They said that they saw him just kind of standing around the bridge that was over top of Stump Lake around 12:15 to 12:30, which If you know, he left at 11:45. It's a 5-minute walk. He should have been back at his dormitory at 11:50. So why almost 30 minutes after his supposed departure from the party would he just be standing on the bridge? Because of this caused investigators to quickly focus their search around the bridge, but more specifically the lake. The investigators, expecting the very worst from this scenario, they began a search of the lake, thinking that maybe Joshua, disoriented from the alcohol, even though his friend said he wasn't buzzed, 7 beers can make someone a little tipsy, so they expected the worst, that maybe the alcohol in his system had caused him to fall and maybe either drown or just end up washed up on some shore and disoriented. So they began to search the lake, and while this was happening about a week after his disappearance, cops had gotten about a dozen bloodhounds to search the surrounding forest for Joshua. The initial dive for Joshua resulted in nothing. They weren't able to find him or any trace of him, and the same story goes for the bloodhounds that had been searching for him in the forest. They had found nothing. Now, there were some people criticizing the police and their use of some of the bloodhounds, as even though a lot of them had done cases like that before where they were trained to do that type of case, there were a few that weren't exactly trained to handle this kind of tracking mission, and that some of the cops even used stuff from Joshua that would have lost his scent by that time. So there was some criticism on that part, but it definitely wasn't all the dogs, as there were some, if not most, were qualified for the search. The focus didn't necessarily stay on the search in the woods, but rather the search in Stump Lake. Joshua's parents were not exactly, I guess, satisfied with that initial dive and thought that the police didn't do a great job, so they, with the help of the Trident Foundation, had began a second search for Joshua in Stump Lake in 2003 after they got permission from the school to search the area. The Trident Foundation, once again, like the cops, came up with nothing on this dive. However, they did attempt to search the neighboring lake of, I believe it's pronounced Sagatan Lake, in any time from 2003 to 2004. They searched that lake, which it was connected to Stump Lake by some small channel or little river, and they once again weren't able to find anything. And the lake would be a source of many investigations and searches until almost 19 years after the disappearance, when in 2022, the police finally ruled out drowning as the idea of what could have caused the disappearance. Now, the lake and him kind of falling in it was the biggest idea of what could have happened. That was the main theory, was that he fell in. But a few other theories that were propped up by police, and starting with this one, was that he may have committed unaliving. I can't really say the word because of YouTube, but he may have unalived himself. And that was because, as the police said, he had just broken up, or him and his girlfriend had just broken up, and he was quite emotional about it. But people quickly combated this who knew Joshua and said that even despite this, he still had many friends, was doing well in school, and even him and his girlfriend, who had broken up, had stayed friends past the relationship. So this was quickly ruled out. Now, what really turns this case into just a tragic story into something super kind of weird and a little creepy and even a little interesting is what was found on Joshua's computer in 2008. It took the police almost 6 years to finally access his desktop, but once they did, they were unable to recover data on his desktop, which showed that Joshua had made a fake account where he pretended to be a blonde woman. On this account, it was found that Joshua had been flirting with multiple men pretending to be this blonde woman, and this led to a few theories. Some of them was that Joshua was experimenting with his sexuality through this kind of method, and others were that this was a fetish of his where he'd pretend to be a woman and talk to men online. And I'll put the name of it up here as I'm just not able to remember it right now. But both of these did spark some questions. And the case is still active, as in 2024, just last year, and even late last year, I believe it was November of 2024, the police department who is doing this case actually revealed photos of 28 men that were found on Joshua's laptop in hopes that someone would recognize them and it would get them some new leads. Now, as far as I know, no one has confessed to knowing any of these men. Now, they found something else on the desktop which a lot of people found very odd, but I honestly think it's not as weird once you give it a little thought, and it is a little easier to explain, I should say. So, he left his dormitory at 11:06. He arrived at the party around 11:10, 11:11. He left the party at 11:45 and should have been back to his dorm around 11:50. Then he was seen at the bridge over Stump Lake at 12:15 to 12:30. And finally, they found on his desktop that that music had manually been playing from 11:52 to 12:32 the night of his disappearance. So here's my theory, and if I get anything wrong here, please correct me in the comments, but this is what I think happened. I think from the party, he left and originally got back at 11:50. When he got back, he started playing music on his desktop from 11:52 to 12:32. And then you might be wondering, but how could people see him at 12:15 to 12:30? And honestly, I think that just comes down to human error. These were two college students who had just thought about this case as soon as they started hearing that someone disappeared, and they thought that they may have seen him. Not saying that they didn't see him or anything, or that they saw a different person, but what I'm saying is maybe they misremembered the time, and it was more around 12:30 or not 12:30, but 12:40 that they saw him as opposed to 12:15 to 12:30. So I think human error explains that away. And when I kind of worked through this theory, and it's just like broad strokes of a theory, like if I'm wrong, please correct me, but what I think happened after that was while he was on his laptop, he could have been catfishing one of these people or talking to one of them. And this kind of lines up with another theory that Joshua was abducted by one of the people he was catfishing. Many students and even campus security remember seeing an orange car that didn't belong to any of the students on the campus a few times, and even the night of Joshua's disappearance. So it's a theory that is a little and somewhat believed by some people that maybe Joshua had been texting that person and they were there to meet up, or Joshua was meeting up with them, and the person either just abducted him or who knows what happened. But it'd kind of be in line a bit with what I think I said, but again, if I'm wrong, please correct me. Please correct me. There was one more theory that was very big, and that was that this was connected to other college kids who had gone missing after parties or at a bar. And this was during a time where 3 to 4 other college kids had disappeared after attending some sort of event/party, and the cops did try to link it to Joshua's case, but ultimately, just due to the lack of information, they weren't able to do much with it. And to this day, Joshua remains missing, and sadly, it looks like he will stay missing, which is a really sad case because I don't think people will ever really see what happened to Joshua, and that kind of goes in line with the rest of the cases that we'll be covering. So let's just move on to the next one. Keith Reinhardt was a former Chicago sports writer. He was 50 years old, and around this time, he was kind of having a midlife crisis. Due to this, it caused him to move from Chicago to Silver Plume in hopes of achieving 2 goals: to get back in shape via hiking and to write a book. However, Silver Plume wasn't just some random location that he picked off a map. He picked to live here because the inspiration for a book he was writing happened in this town. This is one of those rare cases where the disappearance itself was caused by someone else who had disappeared, and that was Tom Young. Tom Young owned and ran a bookstore in Silver Plume, and he had ran it for about a year or 2 before his disappearance, and he was a very well-liked person, but he was pretty quiet. He had a dog named Gus, and one day him and Gus closed up the shop and went for a hike. He didn't return for some time, but people didn't find this all that weird, as he had kind of previously stated that, yeah, I'm just going on a vacation for the next 3 weeks. So it took a while before people really started to wonder where he had been. People believe that the disappearance happened September 7th of 1987, as that was the last time people ever saw Tom, as he was closing up his shop or getting ready for the vacation, but he would actually be going to hike the mountain with his dog Gus. 10 months later, 2 hunters would come across Tom Young's body. Tom Young and his dog Gus had walked into the mountain, and Tom unalived himself and unalived his dog. This was verified by the positioning of the bullets and just like the exit wounds, as well as the fact that there was a revolver found close to the scene. Which, mental health, horrible thing, like I've had my fair share of run-ins, but didn't feel necessary to kill the dog. I just feel like, did you have to do that to the dog, Tom? Maybe I'll get a little hate for that, but I don't know. It feels like the dog kill was a little unnecessary. That's just me. Now, if you're a normal person, you'll probably see this as just super upsetting and super sad that someone would go so far as to unalive themselves. Keith didn't. He saw this and was like, wow, that's gonna make a really good story, dude. That's gonna make a great story. You unalived yourself and your precious little puppy? Dude, get ready to be on a book cover. As you could probably put together, this was the story that Keith was basing his novel on, and I was about to call him like a wackadoo and stuff like that for doing such a thing, but then it dawned on me that what he's doing is covering true crime. What I'm doing is the exact same, so I was gonna chirp him a bit, then I realized I'm literally doing the same thing he is. Anyways, I do think there's some merit to say that Keith was getting a little wacky about this case, as he had gone so far that he had done stuff like buy the shop that Tom Young had previously owned and turn it into an antique shop that he ended up doing really well in the summer, so, it obviously worked for him there, but it was just a little business to have while he was working on his book. This wasn't the only thing, as he'd even go around asking, like, Tom Young's acquaintances and family and friends just some questions about Tom to work on his book, which it was only like 2 weeks after they found Tom's body that he moved there. So pretty soon after the disappearance, or not the disappearance, but the finding of his body, he was going around asking people about it, which I bet he did it respectfully, but it's also like, do you have to do it so soon, Keith? The book can wait a little till people were done grieving. Just thought. And I talk a lot about the book, and that's because the book itself was supposed to be a very, very heavily inspired off the case itself. And not even just heavily inspired, but it would be almost the exact same as what actually happened to Tom. But instead, the main character would be a mixture of Tom and Keith himself. And it is important to know that Keith, as much as I'm kind of bullying him here, he was a very loud and sociable guy who a lot of people seemed to get along with. Whereas Tom, even though he was very well liked, he was much quieter and to himself. Also, I got something wrong there. I said it only 2 weeks after the body was found he moved there. No, he was there before. Like, he went on the hike where he ultimately disappeared a week after the body was found. And that's what we're going to talk about. Just a week after Tom's body was found up in the mountains, Keith would go for a hike. And the way he left was the complete opposite to Tom. Tom was quiet and had made a story as to where he was going. Keith, he was walking down the middle of the street telling everyone he saw that he was going for a hike. This puzzled a lot of people as he was only wearing jeans, some runners, and a plaid shirt, which is not exactly a lot, especially when you consider that this was a 6-hour hike he was going on, and it was already 4:30 in the afternoon. He didn't even have a backpack or really any supplies with him. Keith had also had a friend who had been living in Silver Plume for a while and ran a coffee shop on the mountain where people hiked, and he was saying I think Keith was saying to the man, was that he'd be there soon, or, he'd come visit him when he was hiking, and it was when he didn't visit him that he got worried, and a lot of the townspeople got worried, and eventually they reported him missing. Keith was declared missing, and after a 7-day search using helicopters, 125 men, and dozens of bloodhounds, Keith was nowhere to be found. And it wasn't just like this was some rural task force with no experience. This was a Colorado Alpine rescue team who had found every person in their last 30 years of operations, with Keith being their only person or the only blotch on their record. They couldn't find him. People on the task force cited him not having any supplies or any baggy clothes or really anything on him as a big reason they weren't able to track him down, as he just left no trace. He vanished. He was gone. This one is especially creepy to me because he just kind of like moved in to this same shop. He basically almost lived the same life as a man who had previously gone in and, unalived himself. He basically lived that same life. And almost an exact year after the man went missing and a week after the body was found, he went for a hike and he was never seen again. And it was in the middle of a, midlife crisis, which I can only imagine was a big kind of factor as to why he did this hike. I imagine he was in a really not great state. He was filled with euphoria on writing this book, and the body had just been found. Maybe I can go find something. I'm just putting thoughts out there, and it is really kind of creepy to just think about someone who is like so energetic just vanishing. It's really horrifying, but yeah, this next case is not as horrifying, but it's really sad. On July 9th of 2015, Dior Coons, a 2-year-old boy, would go on a camping trip with his mother, father, grandfather, and a family friend. They'd leave Idaho Falls and they'd drive 2 hours all the way to Timber Creek Campground. On the drive, they only made one stop at a convenience store close to the campground, and once they finally got to the area, they drove pretty deep into the woods until they finally found a spot that was not only away from everybody else, but close to a river so they could do some fishing. They drove into their spot, got unpacked, and shortly after went to bed, as by the time they had gotten there and had everything unpacked, it was pretty late. The next day, they made some breakfast, ate, and the parents, as well as the baby, went into town to get some more supplies and groceries, while the family friend went fishing and the grandpa stayed at the camp. By the time that the baby and the parents had returned to the campsite, the grandpa was still at the campsite while the family friend was still out fishing. The parents wanted to go join the man fishing, but said that it probably wasn't a good idea to take the baby with them to the river as it was pretty rapid at that time. So they told the baby to, I shouldn't laugh during this case, but it made me think of the rapper. Anyways, they told Baby Coons to just stay at the campsite, but he had kind of followed them somewhat down the trail, so they were telling him to go back. The problem with this was, even though they said they wanted the grandfather to look after him, the grandfather says in later interviews they never told him, nor did he ever hear to take care of him. So he went into the trailer and took a nap, and the parents walked off thinking that the baby had returned to the campsite. About 30 minutes later, the parents and the family friend would return to the campsite, and quickly, if you're wondering why I'm not telling or saying their names, it's just because of what happens later on in the case. It just felt better to refer to them in this way. So, anyways, they returned to the campsite, and when they saw that the grandfather was sitting by himself, they asked him where Dior was. He said that he didn't know he was supposed to be watching them and thought that that Dior was fishing with them. They all got worried and immediately started looking around, and when they couldn't spot him or find him in any nearby area, at 2:30 p.m. they called dispatch and told them what he was wearing and how he went missing. Now, even though they did call very quickly after the disappearance, the problem was that they had gone pretty deep into the woods, and it took almost 2 hours for police or law enforcement to get out there, that it had been some time before the official search started. See, the original theory would have been that since Dior was only 2 years old and fairly small, around 30 to 40 pounds, the most likely, or not likely, but a likely event would be that if anything got him, it would have been some sort of wildlife, whether that be a cougar, wolf, or a bear. But when they didn't find any type of struggle or any sign of blood or anything, they quickly ruled that out, as the very least someone would have heard something, and if they wouldn't have heard something, they would have found some sort of struggle from the baby. Originally, they had a 3-day search where they found nothing, but this 3-day search would soon turn into months with no leads, and during this time, the surrounding towns became very supportive of the family. That is until police started to reveal some information. The parents, the family friend, and the grandfather all had differing accounts of what happened. And not just that, but the parents also failed a polygraph test. Both of them took one individually, and they both failed. Another big thing that caused some kind of red flags or worry for people regarding the family was when interviewed, the family said, we took Dior into the city, or not the city, but the town that was close to the campsite when we were going to get groceries the day after we got to the camp. People could corroborate that we had the baby with us. So police went and they asked some locals, have you seen these two? And if so, was there a baby? No one mentioned seeing a baby, and even one person had said that, yeah, I saw the couple, but, never saw a baby. In fact, I saw a baby seat, but there was no baby in the car. And even though all this evidence may seem damning and may be like, well, why didn't they suspect them? The problem is, you have grieving parents, they may get some things right, they're going to be emotional, so it's hard to fully just kind of get them off these minuscule pieces of evidence, especially with a case like this where it's their own child. So they wouldn't really be considered suspects just yet, but a year after the disappearance, they were searching the mother's storage unit, and they found the jacket that baby Dior was supposedly wearing at the time of his disappearance. This was by far the straw that broke the camel's back, as after this discovery, the police would list them as suspects, and the family friend and grandfather would be listed as people of interest. Not only that, but other extended family members kind of became suspicious of them as well, and kind of is a very, very nice word to use here, as they were so suspicious of the parents that they hired a private investigator. After some time working, the private investigator said that, whether deliberately or accidentally, he believes that the parents had killed baby Dior. This lines up with a theory, or it would be the catalyst to a theory that would appear, that being that the camping trip was just a cover-up. See, if you remember, the camping trip was last second, so a lot of people point to that being a thing where they said they'd take baby Dior on the camping trip and then report him missing, and that would cover up the death. As you'll recall, the only people who actually said Dior was on the said camping trip was the 4 people involved. No locals said that they saw him, and there was not even tracks that baby Dior was out there during the time of the disappearance. Struggle, I mentioned that. There was no signs of struggle, but there was no signs that he was out there at all. And while it looked like things were heating up and we would get an answer, it has been 9 years since the disappearance, and we still don't have anything solid. Now, obviously, a lot of people do believe that the parents are the culprits of this, and when I originally read that, I was kind of leaning towards that just being the kind of scapegoat answer, but the more I read, I do kind of subscribe to that theory. Now, with that being said, I don't think they did it intentionally. I think it may have been some type of accident. Now, that's not me defending them in any way. It just doesn't seem like it was a malicious, thing that they did. Rather, it seems like an accident. They got flustered and they tried to cover it up. So either way, it really is a heartbreaking story that happened, and I gotta be honest, I don't know why I put this one in here considering how sad it is, but there's not much to say other than, you gotta hope that maybe, even though it's a long shot, you gotta hope that maybe he resurfaces one day and he's completely okay and fine, but unfortunately, I think there's a darker conclusion to it. Christopher Carlton Tompkins was a devout Christian and a very hardworking and kind man who lived with his mother, and by all accounts, everyone said that he was a very sweet and kind person. And sadly, while at work on January 25th of 2002, he mysteriously vanished. This hardworking attitude eventually landed him a job as a surveyor, where he'd go out to some type of area and do work with 3 other crew members to, like it says, survey an area. A job which he said to his mother he enjoyed very much. The day of the incident was like any other. He was getting ready for work and eventually got picked up and went to the job site with one of his coworkers. He arrived at the job site at 8 a.m. and quickly everybody in the crew was off to work. Now, just for some context later on to just tell you how odd it is how he disappeared, they were working in a line formation, that being obviously standing in a line, but between them they would be like 50 feet apart from each other, so they could just easily talk to each other, not even have to shout, and they'd hear it. So you'd think that, you'd notice something if someone just disappeared from the line. The men worked for a few hours and eventually took their lunch break and then got back to work around 1:30, and this would be when the incident occurred. When they got back to work, one of the surveyors was having a conversation with Christopher. However, I guess something made a noise on the other side, so he turned his head to go look at it, and after about 30 seconds to a minute of trying to find what made the noise, he looked back and Christopher was gone. Now, he told the other men in the crew that Christopher had just gone, but they had all chalked it up to him just going deeper into the woods to use the bathroom or do something in private. And this theory that he had just gone to take a leak or use the bathroom or just kind of anything casual was validated by the fact that his tools were on the ground, but they looked like they had been placed nicely, not like he had been dragged away by something or like he was in a rush to get away. It just looks like he calmly put them down, then walked into the bush. After some time and he still didn't return, they got very worried, as this wasn't like Christopher to waste time on the job. Like I said, he was a hardworking, committed man, so it wasn't exactly in his character to take long breaks. They immediately searched the area, and when they couldn't find him, they got extremely worried. And actually, the first call wasn't to police, but one of the surveyors called their wife saying that Christopher had gone missing. It wouldn't actually be till about 2 hours later until the mother was notified. After the call to the wife, they called the police and a search began. It wasn't until 4:15 that the mother knew that Christopher was missing, and by that time, a search for him had already begun. At the beginning, the search was actually pretty fruitful, as almost right away, they had found Christopher's boot on a barbed wire fence, implying that maybe he was climbing over it. They also found some blue threads belonging to, or supposedly belonging to, his jeans. Now, the investigators were pretty puzzled by this, as him climbing over this barbed wire fence and just leaving his boot would imply that he was being chased by something or he was in a rush to get out of the area. But there was no sign of a struggle, once again, just like the Baby Dior case. There was no sign of a struggle, and there was no blood in the area, just his boot and some threads on a fence. And even though the investigation started out very well, nothing really came of it for the next little bit, which unfortunately caused the investigators to come to a very lackluster conclusion that he had just simply walked off the earth and had gone to start a new life. 6 months after Christopher's disappearance, a farm worker was just kind of doing, the typical chores on his farm when he had found Christopher's second boot on his private property. The farm where the boot was found was only less than a mile away from the surveying site, which was very odd. It also implied that Christopher quickly lost his second boot after the first one and continued to run somewhere. Dude, that Roma Dunze card just fell behind me, and I almost had a mini heart attack. You could probably see it in the camera, dude. And despite the discovery of the second boot, after a short time, the case was closed once again. This wasn't really something the mother agreed with, as she thought that the surveying crew had kind of been not saying everything they knew. Now, there was some things that may make them look guilty. First being, one of the surveyors after the disappearance acquired a lawyer, and after the disappearance, I think a couple years after it, one of the other surveyors had actually been arrested for a violent crime. And there was also the boss who said the day of the disappearance, Christopher was acting odd. The mother said Christopher was acting completely normal. So this kind of puts some eyes on the surveying company and the crew, as even if they didn't have a part to do with anything or they weren't the main cause for the disappearance, people believe that they knew more than they were letting on. Now, I could be completely wrong, and if I get any of this wrong, or maybe if there's more information that I missed, please correct me, but I don't think that it was the coworkers. I mean, in terms of the acquiring a lawyer, I know some people can get pretty paranoid about being a part of something like this, and they don't want to, get entrapped by law enforcement or incriminate themselves by saying something stupid, so they get a lawyer. For the violent crime, that happened like years later, and I just don't know if you can point that. Like, it just seems like a weak kind of comparison. And for the boss saying he was acting weird and then the mother saying he wasn't, I just kind of chalk that up to the boss probably not really knowing him, and maybe Christopher was having a bad day, and, that's why he thought he was acting weird, but the mother has known him all of his life and has seen these types of days. Maybe I'm putting on a stretch here, but I just don't see this as the coworkers being a part of the foul play if there was foul play involved. I do think they probably know a little more than they are saying just to save themselves, but I don't think they did anything to hurt Christopher. The disappearance of Christopher Tompkins is considered to be a missing 411, or he's a part of the missing 411 cases, which in layman's terms, it's just, when people disappear in the woods or in the wilderness. And I do think it is somewhat interesting, but I also tend to go against missing 411 because a lot of the time they take these real tragedies of people who go missing or disappear and the family's grieving, and they turn it into theories about Bigfoot or aliens. And this is another case where, people who subscribe to the missing 411, it's obviously not everyone who does, but a lot of people have said maybe it was Bigfoot or maybe it was aliens. And I just think that's I don't know. Unless you find Bigfoot's ball hairs on the scene or you find some green ectoplasm, I think it's completely inappropriate to start throwing stuff like that out there. There is a real family out there grieving the disappearance of their son or their brother or their father or family member, and you start bringing in Bigfoot and aliens. I don't like that at all, especially with how 411 has been trending recently. I don't like that. Unfortunately, Christopher Tompkins is still missing, and the police are keeping that original theory that he just walked off and started a new life, which many people don't really like, especially the mother. But as of right now, the case is closed and Christopher is still gone. This last case is a massive one, and honestly, some I'd say is all of these I'd just implore you to go do your own research on and just kind of do a little more about. This is just meant to be somewhat of an introductory and a rough outline of the case as opposed to in-depth. But one of the cases here, the last one we're going to do, is the case of Nicholas Barclay. This one not only makes me mad, but also is so intricate. It's so weird. Now, I'm going to remind you right now that this is a very intricate case. So there's a documentary on this case called The Imposter. I want you to go watch it because that does a really good job at explaining it, way better than I ever could. And I'm probably going to remind you again at the end of this video, but let's get into the case. Nicholas Barclay was your average teenage boy. He loved basketball and he was a sweet kid. He grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and the day of his disappearance, that being June 13th of 1994, he was playing basketball with some friends at a local park. He failed to return home after this. A search would be launched, but the real Nicholas was never found. What do I mean? Well, 3 years after the disappearance, someone contacted the family claiming to be Nicholas. Yeah, this is where shit gets crazy. I'm gonna just outline what happened. So the family flew him back. They had him live with him for 5 months, and it took 5 months for the family to realize it wasn't their kid. You want to see what their kid looked like? This was their kid. This was who the new kid was. How did it take you 5 months to do that? They look nothing alike. Somehow, this kid who looks nothing like Nicholas, and matter of fact, he had a different accent than Nicholas, had somehow convinced not only his family, but law enforcement that he was the real Nicholas. How? How do you, like, what? Oh, yeah, no, it doesn't end there, by the way. The imposter kid, by the way, apparently there's a couple of theories regarding that. One of them is, it all leads down the same rabbit hole that obviously he's not the kid, but it goes in two different directions. The first direction was that he was just going to live this life forever, but after doing some research or just digging around the house, he discovered that the parents had actually killed Nicholas, and he was afraid that he was next. So he gave up the facade. What is going on, man? What? The other one was that the parents still killed Nicholas, but the imposter didn't know this, but the parents did, and they were just like, oh, well, we'll keep the kids so no one suspects anything and, you know, we don't get in trouble. So there's like this big, like, people are like, oh, well, the kid was able to fake it. Oh, well, the parents did. Dude, did they kill Nicholas? Like, I wasn't able to find a general. The craziest part about all this, the craziest part is the guy who was an imposter, his name was Frederic Bourdain. Like, he's French, so, like, who cares? Ew. But anyways, he's a serial imposter who had been nicknamed the Chameleon. So basically every single bit of attention that should be on Nicholas is on this little asshole, dude. Like, this case has been driving me crazy. I can't explain this, dude. I haven't been able to find, like, any leads on if Nicholas was actually killed by his parents because all this just focuses on this little shithead, dude. I'm sorry that I'm swearing so much, but this case has me heated. Anyways, this case has all sorts of twists, as you can tell from my attitude. All sorts of twists. Super confusing. I am pushing you. Like, I'm literally pushing you. You're on the edge of a cliff. I'm shoving you to go watch that imposter show because it will explain it far better than I ever could. Anyways, guys, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I did just want to say a few more things before we end. Quickly, I just want to say, if I got anything wrong or if you want to add anything on in the comments, please do. I beg you guys do. I'm brand new to this kind of crime, like true crime thing, so if I ever get anything wrong, I just need you guys to correct me, please. I try to do my research, but I'm human. I could get stuff wrong too. Also, new videos should be coming out every Sunday around 3 p.m. I'm going to keep this style. Obviously, true crime is going to be one of the focuses. I'm also doing creepypastas and all just sort of odd topics. But yeah, like, I enjoy doing this type of stuff, so obviously if you guys have any critiques at all, please let me know. I'm trying to improve my channel as much as I can, and, typical YouTuber schlock here. If you like the content, please either consider liking or subscribing. It goes a long way in helping the channel, and, it goes a long way in helping me. But anyways, guys, I'll see you in the next one, and have a great day. Bye. Hey, guys, I know I said that was the end of the video, but while I was editing the video, I had actually come up with my plan for the next video, and I thought I'd just announce it now since this video got pretty depressing with the whole Nicholas Barclay thing and baby Dior tunes. I thought I'd do something a little more fun and just better, I guess. And in the next video, I'll be discussing shows like Mountain Men, the one where it's like a bunch of rednecks trying to hunt Bigfoot, and shows similar to it. Just thought I'd switch it up to something a little more fun, as this one was pretty depressing, and I think that might be the pattern I end up taking on this channel. I'll do one where it's a serious true crime thing, then one that's a little more fun and fake, just to keep it lighthearted enough. But anyways, guys, see you in the next one. Have a good day, for real this time.